talent. But I thought I'd start by telling you what a talent is, because in the Bible, a talent is a unit of money. So it's the finance sermon for you. Don't worry, we're not talking about money today. But because it's a talent, it also gets used in our English language talent. So when you hear ministers preach on this, sometimes they talk about money, sometimes they're talking about spiritual gifts, sometimes a minister will find some other crazy way to take it. We'll find out how that goes. But I tried to do research on how much a talent was, and I learned that no one knows. I got like a dozen different answers of what a talent was, but everyone's answer was it was a huge sum of money. It was a lot. One said roughly in today's dollars, it would be like $1 million. So in your mind, when you listen to the sermon, that's as good a number as anything. Think of $1 million per talent of how much it would cost. So that's kind of what they're talking about. But we're also going to talk about it in the spiritual gifts mindset. So it's Matthew 25, 14 to 30. And the other thing I'll mention is you'll hear me using the word slave. And depending on which English translation, sometimes it's servant or slave. Sometimes I like using the least politically correct slave terminology rather than servant, because that's honest. That's what they were. The Bible even tells us they were beaten, and the Bible even tells us that they weren't free to go. So if they were beaten and not free to go, that's a slave. So I just use more honest terminology in translation. So Matthew 25, 14 to 30. For it is as if a man going on a journey summons his slave and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. At once the one who had received 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy within a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and I gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested the money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what is my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. For this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And how are we doing? We got cameras, we have me, everyone's good, okay? Now, those of you who know me, the visitors don't know me well enough, but I would have expected that during my sermon, like God getting angry with me and then the sermon going out. I was just reading the scripture verse. I didn't say anything bad here yet. We made it to the end of the scripture here. So now we're going to talk about risk today. The sermon is about taking risks. And actually, when I was writing a sermon, as a side note, I couldn't help but to think of you, Alan. We just heard Alan's life story at small group, and decade after decade, you were telling us about risks that were taken, decisions that were made that seemed unpopular or risky or daring, and that's what life is, and that's how Alan continued to be successful throughout his life, is a willingness to take risks. The story is about money, the talent is money, but it's about something much deeper than just a financial sermon. It's about the faith and the courage one needs to have in order to take risks. In the parable, a master entrusts his servants or slaves with talents. 5 for one of them, 2 was given to another, and 1 to the last slave. The first 2 servants go out and they invest their talents, and they double their talents they were given. They took chances. You don't double your money in a short period of time without taking chances. They knew there was a possibility they could have lost everything and risked everything in order to multiply their talents. That's why it's also important to use more honest language, like the language of slave. Because now we're realizing this slave, what if a slave lost all of his master's money? I mean, that would be a bad thing. You know, he took a risk in order to make this happen. But the third slave, he buried his talent. He was afraid to lose his master's money. Rather than taking risk, he held on to it tightly. He wanted nothing to happen to it. The slave thought he was doing what was right. He protected his master's money. In fear of taking a risk, it showed his lack of faith. We have all been entrusted with many gifts and talents and opportunities. And each one of us must decide what to do with those talents. Will we invest them boldly, or will we bury our talents out of fear? Over the past few years, this church has been through a lot. Like so many communities during the pandemic, we faced a reduction in numbers, both in the worship attendance and in the financial giving. And more recently, there was a pastoral change. Not just any pastoral change, but the pastor who preceded me was here for 27 years. That was a traumatic shift within the church. I had the privilege to come and be your new pastor. When I came to this church, I did not come to this church because it was a thriving church. I took a risk. I sold my house during the worst time to try to buy a new house. I sold a house, moved across the country to intentionally and knowingly lead a congregation that was shrinking in size. Now, we can now see, especially today, signs of life emerging again as we continue to grow. Over the past couple of years, Windermere Union Church has seen new families and new faces continuing to emerge. It's because we dared to take risks. We've taken a lot of risks these past couple of years, haven't we? This church has chosen to let go of the safe approach. We've taken chances as the first 2 slaves took chances, and it's paid off. Our journey here as a congregation shows that risk is not only necessary, but it is life-giving. After moving into our new building, this congregation held on to the old pews and old windows for 17 years. I know I keep bringing that up, but that's such a great visual. We literally had a sanctuary here full of pews and a storage closet full of windows. Now we kept some pews and some windows are embedded in the church, so we have a connection with the past. But we realized that the remnants of the past were weighing us down. We were holding on to the past and not looking to the future. Sure, these things are comforting, but we realized that they were preventing us from doing vital ministry. It was only when we embraced the courage to change and to let go and to trust that God is leading us somewhere into the future. This willingness to take risks is something Jesus teaches us that we need to value. When we step out of our comfort zone and place ourselves in God's hand, believing that new life is possible. This is the difference between the slaves who multiplied their money and the slaves who buried their money. The first two slaves believed that the gift could be multiplied. They believed in the potential, even though there were no guarantees. They could have lost it all. But their faith in the potential is what allowed them to experience God's abundance. One of the most significant risks this church has taken since I've been here is when we voted to become an open and affirming O&A congregation. We declared publicly that we welcome the LGBTQ plus community. This stance is not for everyone, but we knew it was a risk, and it was a risk worth taking. But this decision was a unanimous vote within this congregation. Making this decision unanimously, we decided to step out on faith, fully aware that it might turn some people away and might challenge some long-standing traditions. But look at what that risk has brought us. New members who feel that they have a safe place to come and worship. Families who bring them whole selves to worship, free to be who they are. And we become a community of God's inclusive love. Taking this risk was not just about being welcoming, it was about being faithful. It was about living into our understanding of the gospel that God's love is truly for everyone. And each step we take as an O&A congregation reflects the heart of the first two servants who took risks, believing on what we've been giving can be multiplied and create something greater, more dynamic. And every change we make to this worship service, we joked about it earlier today, all the changes going on in the worship service, we take risks with every change. I know we're taking risks with every change. I get the emails, okay? I know we're taking risks. But we need to offer something new, to speak to people in new ways, to lead into the future and not just hold on to the past. Worship is about honoring God, but it's also about creating a space that feels alive and meaningful for everyone who enters in. When we experiment with worship, we're doing exactly what Jesus calls us to do. We put what we've been given to work, and we trust in the possibilities that it may bring. By trying new approaches, we open the door to deeper connections with each other and with God. Every time we let go of something familiar in worship, we create room for something new and transformative. This parable reminds us that a future filled with promise is rarely without risk. The first two servants didn't know if their investments would yield any return, yet they took action anyway. Their courage allowed them to take steps forward. The third servant, who was afraid of losing everything, missed out on the potential. He avoided the unknown and buried his talent and yielded nothing in the end. This is a reminder that we cannot allow our fear to hold us back from where God is calling us to be. We need to take risks. This church is only as strong as our willingness to step forward in faith together. This means taking chances, being willing to embrace change and trusting that God is with us. Our future depends on this. For some, it may mean volunteering for some ministries that's new to you, some place in the church you haven't been involved with before. For others, it might be sharing something that's been on your heart for some time. I've had these conversations with some of you. You've come up to me, I've been thinking for a long time. I'm like, all right, great, let's do it. It might mean stepping forward and serving on some ministry team here at the church. Each of us has been entrusted with something, some gift, something to share, a way that you can connect personally with this church. And the more willing you are to put those talents to work, the more vibrant and dynamic this church will be. Now, all risk, when we say risk, we think of crazy things, right? All risk does not have to be like bold, crazy stunts that your pastor does. Like last week when I was dressed as Jesus preaching the sermon, you don't have to do crazy stunts like that. Or even more so, last year when I dressed as a pirate on Halloween and preached the sermon. You don't have to be that crazy with your stunts. You just need to take a risk. Sometimes the largest risks might seem small and insignificant, but they can hold a big impact. The number one most dynamic impact on any church is the percentage of the congregation who is involved in the life of the church outside of worship. And I want to make sure I repeat that because that's important, and I believe this. The number one most dynamic impact on any church is the percentage of the congregation who is involved in the life of the church outside of worship. Everyone wants to grow the church by saying, hey, let's get people into worship. And we have 12 new faces in worship today. We're like, look, we got new people into worship. Do you know that getting new faces into worship does not grow a church? I know it seems weird, doesn't it? We'll talk about that. What grows a church is the ability to get people involved in the life of the church outside of worship. Now, I'm not just talking about the worker bees, those people who work in the background and make things happen, those who are truly carrying the church on their back. Yeah, they exist, and if you want to be one of those people, we could use you there too. But we're simply talking about participation. We're simply talking about showing up for something, anything. This is why I've covered the wall out in the entrance with posters of all of our upcoming events. This is why I send out a personal video text message to everyone in the congregation telling you what's happening that week. The future of any church depends on the dynamic involvement of the congregation outside of worship. When I first came to this church, I shared a series of videos that I called the master plan videos, telling you what I was going to do when I came into the church. And if you want, they're still online on YouTube, on the church's YouTube site, and it gave the full plan. So if any of you, even longtime members or new people, going, where's the pastor going with this? Watch the videos. I told you when I first came here exactly what I was doing, and I've done exactly what's in the video. The video that I want to share with you today, or talk about today, was when I talked about some statistics about the retention of the church. And I think we have a video or a slide of one of those up here, where we talked about walking through the statistics of the church. In this particular slide, do we have one or no? Oh, just that one in the back's not up. Got it, perfect. We looked at a 5-year period before the COVID pandemic. This way we get clean numbers and we can't blame anything on the pandemic. This is something that happened before the pandemic. In 2011, this church averaged 102 people in worship on Sunday morning. In the following year, that number jumped to 120 people in worship. That would be the last time this church saw 120 people in worship, at least on a regular basis, maybe Christmas or Easter. But other than that, not on an average. That was 12 years ago. The worship attendance has been declining ever since. Even before the pandemic, the attendance had been declining. Each year that has passed, for the last 12 years, this church has gotten older and smaller in numbers. Think of it, if you were 68 12 years ago, you're 80 today. If you were 80 12 years ago, you're 92 today. Not that I'm looking at anyone. 91 though, I think, right? 91. What's remarkably odd about this decline is the facts on the next slide. During this period in our church, over 5 years, we gained 83 new members. That's remarkable. Remember, everyone's concerned about the people coming into church, the 12 new faces. This is great. 80 new faces. This is great. Well, it seems good on the surface, but look closer. We can see that during that same period where we gained 83 new members, the worship attendance dropped by 17 people. How in the world does any church gain 83 new members and during that exact same time lose 17 people in your worship attendance? That seems like an impossibility. There's an answer. Lack of participation outside of worship. Without an active effort to increase participation outside of worship, any growth that we're currently seeing is meaningless. Soon the church will plateau and we'll have a revolving door in and out of worship as we continually attract new people as other people leave the church. It'll be a rotation because they're not connected and grounded beyond worship. We need to create opportunities outside of worship. And what's all this talk about creating stuff outside of worship have to do with risk? Maybe one of the scariest risks to take. Participating in an event outside of worship involves risk on several levels. Many people, as we know, have an incredible fear of being thrust into a social situation with people they do not know. Imagine being a new face, one of these 12 faces I see before us today. You hardly know anyone. These visitors get invited. We say, hey, join the choir. You know, we got Missions Hope, Matthew's Hope. Let's go feed the homeless. Let's come. We got a great small group we do monthly. Come to our small group. A whole host of other activities we invite people to. In order to go to any of these events that we've just invited them to, they need to drive to a different location. They go to a small group, they need to knock on a door of a house of someone they've never met before or don't know. They need to enter into a smaller group size where they can't hide in the back pew. It's a terrifying event. So we'll break down the risk. There's actually 3 levels of risk as I see it as this going outside the church. First is the risk the visitors take. The risk to take to go to this new event. It's scary. It's by far the most difficult thing of the 3 risks. For you to be brand new, not know anyone, and then go out and just enter this blindly new situation where you don't know what to expect. The second risk involves all of our willingness to increase our effort to participate outside the church and to invite others to participate outside the church. These invitations need to be personal. They need to be genuine face-to-face. During these face-to-face invites, we need to realize the emotional battle going on with that visitor. They want to be involved. They want to meet new people. That's why they came to the church. But at the same time, they're terrified of being thrust into a new situation. It's this, both things are happening at the same time. This is where we need to calm their fears. We need to give them a clear, detailed instruction. Where's the address we're going to? What are the names of the people? Let's introduce them to the people who are hosting the small group. Whatever we need to do to make them feel more comfortable in the situation. Don't just generically say, hey, you can join the band if you want to. Hey, you can come to small group. No, you need to go beyond this. You need to tell them exactly what to expect. You need to drive them to the event. I'm going to pick on a few things. I'm going to pick on Clifford over here. I don't like picking on people, another thing. Clifford goes, hey, I play the guitar. I'm like, oh, you do? Huh, interesting. We have a band, And then I said, hey, let me introduce you to Troy. And then it's not just introducing him to Troy. He's like, well, how do I know what the music is? Do they send out the chords or the sheets, music, or whatever it is that you do? And he's asking me a bunch of questions, and I don't know the answer because I'm not a musician. So then I talk to Troy, and I connect the two of them together, and I'm answering questions. It was a process, and now he's our guitarist in the band. This is great. I happen to know, yay! I happen to know Martha personally invited Jolie to Windsong this week. It wasn't just a, hey, you want to come? It was a genuine, this is what to expect, this is what we are, and she ended up coming, another visitor. It's those kinds of intentionalities to go beyond, not just a, hey, let's show up, but we need to go beyond that. That's why I'm doing the experiment with the ice thing. I don't have this detailed for all of you. I'm making you do the rest of the details. Find your group. If you go out to dinner with a group, should it be like the older people go with their group and then the young families go with this group? I don't know. Who did you invite? Do you want it to be multi-generational? Do you want a bunch of families to just go to McDonald's? Do you want a little bit more formal? I don't care what group you do. You decide your own groups. You make 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, but talk to people. Get on the phone call. Talk to some of these new faces here. Let's get involved. Let's be intentional about making these kind of things happen, because this is going to be what grows the church. Is not just getting people to try here, but to come here and keep them here as we get more people coming on. We all know this church is super friendly, but we must acknowledge there's a tremendous difference between welcoming a stranger during the passing of the peace and maybe meeting one of these people and saying, hey, do you want to go to lunch after church? How many of you ever invited a stranger to lunch after church? Or offered to drive them to one of these events, to get to know them a little bit more. Maybe trade social media information and, Facebook or texting back and forth, getting to know the other person. The last risk is not just about inviting the other people. The last risk is just about showing up. And I'm even talking about the longtime members here, just showing up. Every longtime member of this church who's active in the life of the church, even if you didn't invite a new person to come to the thing, just show up. Your presence means everything. There's something powerful in just showing up to the events. One might think that coming to the event you need to volunteer or do work, but just show up. Your presence there is going to make the event breathe new life. You're going to be there in a smaller setting, and you're going to be able to get to know people on a more intimate level and build deeper friendships. You're going to make it special for other people. Being present allows for these deeper relationships to build, to be more than just people who show up here on a Sunday morning and listen to a sermon. The more we show up for each other, the stronger this community becomes. You're building friendships, creating memories, and yes, growing the church just by being present. As we look ahead and we remember that every act of faith, every risk that is taken, every new idea that is shared is a part of God's work among us. We don't take these risks alone. We're taking these risks as a community of believers. When we make changes, when we reach out and we extend a hand to a new person, we embody the faith of the first two servants who took risk. We choose to believe what God has given to us, and we multiply it. I invite everyone here to reflect on what God has been inviting you to do. What's been tugging at your heart? Where will you participate in the life of the church? Where will you just show up? You don't have to show up to every event, but find your event and show up to that event. We'll take a journey together. We'll find the courage to take risks together as a congregation. May we embrace the future of this church, embrace what God has in store for us, knowing that each talent that each of us has is a talent that we need to take risks with, to go outside of our comfort zone, to do what we don't want to do, but do it for the sake of God. Do it for the sake of the person sitting next to you. Do it for the sake of the future of this church. I mean, look around. This church is growing. This is exciting. The music's dynamic. Everything, it just gets better every Sunday. Everything's going great. We have so many people coming in, but we got to take risks if we're going to grow the church, if we're going to be the dynamic church that we know that we can be. Let's keep moving forward. Amen.